Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get started. Thank you all for joining us. This is the Generate version 11.4 office hours. So today we will be looking at the changes included in the 11.4 release, which you should have gotten an email. It was just released out this morning. We will review the Generate 12.0 work, look at our release calendar, and then we'll open it up for specific discussions. Additionally, as always, we are including the QR code for the survey. If you could just take 2 to 3 minutes to fill that out, it really does help us moving forward and help preparation for our calls in the future. Johnny?
I think most everybody probably knows me now because I've done these for a few sessions, but my name is Johnny Cunningham. I am an ETL developer implementation specialist. I've never heard that except in this presentation. But I work with states helping build ETL and run migrations and validate data and that sort of work. So I'll be stepping you through the release today. And then along the way, if you have any questions, feel free to come off mute. That's fine. Or if you want to put it in the chat, we've got some folks monitoring the chat and they can stop me as well. I think something just came up in the chat before I jump in. Let me make sure. Okay. We will get that information to you to make sure you're on the mailing list so that like when these invites come out, you will get it. And then also, if there's anybody else from your team that you think would benefit from coming to these, by all means, let us know, their email addresses, names, and we can add them to the invitation as well. For those of you that have been with us for a while, been through this cycle a few times, we typically have 3 releases and then we go to the numbered release. Like we would typically go from 11.3 to 12. And we talked about this in a few of the previous office hours. We recently changed we sort of jumped our version forward to align ourselves to align Generate with the CEDS and the CEDS data warehouse releases because they were on version 11. So we jumped to version 11. And then, so like I said, typically we would go from 11.3 to 12. But in this cycle, they were still wrapping some work up for the data warehouse changes for version 12. And we needed to release to support the June, July files. So that's the reason there is an 11.4 this cycle. And our next release will be version 12, which will have all of the data warehouse version 12 changes as well. So just if you happen to notice that's the reason there's an extra number or an extra sub release in this schedule. Okay. So summary of changes for the IDEA reports. So directory has already been submitted, but as we were working with states on directory and grades offered and charter directory, some of those, we came across a couple of small issues. The first one was the reconstituted status value, the yes/no value in the 29 file has to be in all caps. Otherwise, it trips a validation error in EDPAS. And Generate was storing it as camel case. So we fixed that. And then there was a change in the requirements for 23-24 to exclude reportable programs from grades offered. And we did not have that change. So we made that's now in the code base. So we've got those two to catch up for our directory and grades offered files. And then for child count, we really didn't have any changes. The file specification hasn't changed. The code really hasn't changed on our side. But we did have a state that reports their counts by administrative units for child count instead of like the district. So we made some adjustments to how we can manage that so that we can actually support the administrative unit reporting as well as district reporting, depending on how the state does it. So that was something we got to work on for child count in this release or in this last cycle. And then for assessments, which of course is already passed as well, we found one bug in the code, and it was like a very weird circumstance. But Hispanic students that were attending a private school, so they wouldn't be reported at the private school, but they should have been reported at the LEA because of the way the joins were structured. The Hispanic students were being excluded by the way the race was joining and everything. So we resolved that issue for the assessment files. That's the only changes we had for the IDEA reports in this release. For non-IDEA reports, the big ones coming up, of course, are membership, free and reduced lunch. There's the staff file. And then there's, I always forget, it's 35 federal programs and 129 CCD schools. But the one that we really had a change in was 33. We had a couple of fixes for this. None of these actually impacted the submission file, what was being created that you would actually submit through EdPass. But the two things that we corrected is in the UI, when you were looking at category set A, which is the breakdown of the free and reduced lunch students, it was including a column in there with all zeros because it was trying to insert the direct certification students, which don't exist in category set A. So it was just putting a little thin column of all zeros. So we corrected that in the UI. So the UI now displays correctly. And then the other thing is, if you're familiar with this, so for those of you that aren't, I'll do a quick recap. We have tables in Generate. So when you run your migration, when you migrate your data into the fact and dimension tables, that's still granular student level data. When you run that last migration into the reports, that's when it accumulates all of the students that should be reported, and then aggregates them and puts the counts into the report table. So that's the point where you lose your student level information. So in order to make like matching and validating, records and validating your submission files and things easier, something we developed was like at that point in the migration, right at the point when it has accumulated all the students and then it's going to like run the counts and put those into the report table, we write out the student identifier, whatever information is pertinent, and it does it for every category set at every level particular report. So depending on the report, you have more or less of those debug tables. So don't worry about this. This is our test data. So these are not actual student IDs or anything. But for 33, it's a little different. For the free and reduced lunch file, it's a little different because there's this additional column of data that identifies, and that's what we have highlighted here, which students are direct certification students and which students are lunch free and reduced. And this is in the total category. We did not have that table type abbreviation previously. So one of my colleagues did a lot of work on this, really appreciate her. But we got that table type abbreviation. It took some hoops to jump through. But we've got that in there now, so it's easier to identify which students belong in which group when you're looking at the total category. So that's one of the changes for 33. There were no real changes to the logic itself and to the submission file. It was more like cleaning up some things in presentation. User interface. This is probably where we've got some more significant stuff going on in this release. So in the last release, so in 11.3, we introduced a search feature, and it's on most of the reports. We're slowly replacing a control that we use with an open source control because we're eventually going to generate open source. And so we have to replace that control. So we're slowly, everything that control was doing on the front end, we're replacing. And you'll see, I think there's a reference to it a little bit later as well. So one of the things, once we replaced that control, it gave us some additional functionality that we could leverage with the new control. So in the last release, we released this search feature, which on the screenshot there, if you look in the upper left corner, it's really small. And we will work on making that bigger. But it's really small, the little checkbox next to search. When you click that, this is in the UI on the report screen. So when you're looking at your report totals in the UI, in that grid, you can open the search, and everything that is displayed as a category, you can then search on. So you can filter your results and look at it in any way that you need to. You can filter down to a school or to a specific value for one of the specific permitted value for one of the things in that category set. When we released it in 11.3, there were some restrictions on it, like it was case sensitive, it had to match exactly. It couldn't do partial word matches, things like that. And we said we were going to improve that. So this is the improvement. It is now case insensitive. You can do partial word matches. And then the developer that worked on this, love him to death. He actually added some additional functionality that, so if you're familiar, like if you're an EDFacts coordinator, you probably know the permitted values more than you know the actual like text or whatever that goes along with it. So like, for instance, for what we're looking at on screen here, we've got that one at the top, disability category. And then if you see the first column is autism, right? So if you wanted to filter your results on autism, you could just put the permitted value. You could put AUT. Or for like the second column, you could just put EMN, right? And then it would filter down to just that disability. So it can do what's on screen, the header, or it can also do the permitted value, which is actually stored underneath. It's not something we display on screen, but it can filter on that if you're more comfortable using the permitted values. So the search feature is now a little cleaner, a little easier to use. One of the other things you can see there highlighted in red on the upper right, we added paging. So now it actually, instead of trying to build like, and because in this cycle we had membership, and membership at the school level is obviously a very large set of data. So what it used to do is try to build that entire set of data and then display it on screen. So sometimes there was a lag. It would start to display data, but then the screen was sluggish if you were trying to scroll or do something on screen. So we added paging, which now it displays it in chunks. You can work your way through. You can use the search filter, if you need to get to a specific set of records. But it makes the loading and the transition between the pages much faster, much easier to use the UI to do the things that you might want to do as far as, validations or whatever you need. And then the third one there, we don't really have a way to display it on screen. The third bullet there, we improved the performance of the UI screen because we were working on a large file like with membership. The transition between organization levels. So like it can display the SEA level or the SEA data for membership pretty quickly, the LEA data, fairly quickly. But then when you got to school, sometimes when you made that switch, or if you went straight from SEA to school, it could take a significant amount of time before it, switched over and started displaying. So we also did some improvements in the background on how the data is transitioned between those. So that you should see some improvement there as well. It'll be faster. The response will be faster when you're switching between organization levels. And then we also made improvements on creating the submission file, because that was also a process that could, take a fair amount of time when it's trying to build a very large file like the school level membership file. So we made some performance improvements there, which should make that process faster as well. These are just general changes that are included in this release. So the staging table snapshot utility was introduced, I believe, maybe 2 releases ago. I can't remember at this point, which is kind of sad. But there was a problem with it if you had an older version of SQL Server. So we resolved that. I think it's backward compatible all the way to 2012, maybe 2008. I don't know if anybody would still be running 2008, but it's backward compatible to more versions now. So makes it a little more useful for everybody, depending on what you have. The generate fact types one, this is sort of under the covers. And for those of you that have been with us for a while, this will probably make sense. For the newer folks, this may not. But generate, like we do everything with fact types, and you'll see like the migration, the names of the stored procedures that do the migrations. We use the fact type names in there. And basically in generate, what a fact type is, it's any grouping of data that, like file specifications or data that are basically the same set of data. So for instance, discipline, right? So if you think about IDEA discipline, it's the 6 files. If you add 86 in the non-IDEA one, then there's 7. But we refer to all of those by the fact type discipline. Actually, that's part of this change, and I'll describe that in a second. But so that's how generate sort of groups that data so we can migrate things more efficiently. And we don't have to do one file at a time. We can do them in groups, and we do that by fact type. When generate was initially built, there was a fact type called submission, which separated it from like some on-screen reports and some custom state reports that were being designed. So submission was created to define this is an EDFacts submission fact type as opposed to something else. And then as generate started being built out, we realized, okay, we need more specific fact types. We can't just have one generic submission. But there were still a few things that were in that submission, and we just hadn't had time to work through that. And this time we were able to. So discipline, assessment, and staff were the 3 that were part of submission. So like if you were actually trying to do something in the background or you're running something manually and you're going to pass the parameter, you would have to pass submission for those 3, which was a little confusing because if you were working on child count, you actually passed child count. If you're working on membership, you actually passed membership. But when you were doing those 3, you had to remember it was submission. Well, that's now gone. So we replaced submission with 3 specific fact types for discipline, assessment, and staff. This is more under the covers, but it should make it a lot easier, a lot simpler if you have to do any of that kind of work, or if you're going to run anything manually, or if you're doing any work like that in the background, it just makes more sense. And we had an opportunity to make that change. Staging validations, which I encourage everybody to take advantage of. I do this in every office hours we have. But we've added a set of staging validations to the front end. So basically, once you migrate your data in, there's a stored procedure you can execute, and there's documentation in Gitbook. We've got a documentation slide in a little bit. And I definitely encourage everybody to visit our generate documentation on Gitbook. We're constantly trying to add to it and develop it and make it more useful. So if you do happen to go out and look for something out there, if you have any suggestions, something that would make it more useful, please let us know. We're trying to build that out as much as we can. But anyway, there is documentation out there on the staging validation code. But basically what it is you might, once you've migrated your data in for whatever it is you're trying to run, whatever set of files you're working on, once you migrate those into staging, you can run the staging validation code against either the fact type, so the group of files, or a specific file specification, if you want to narrow it down that way. And it will basically run a set of rules that we've created that will do some, common sense checks. Some are very simple, like, did the table even load? Because that would be a very obvious problem that would need to be resolved. Or some more subtle things like, if you loaded a student and you identified them as a special education student with the IDEA indicator, but then you did not load a disability type code for that student, right? So it'll find things like that, and it will point those things out, how many students failed that particular validation, and then give you a SQL query that you can run that will show you those specific set of students in the staging environment. And the reason I'm bringing that up is we had a pretty good set of rules for the IDEA files, and we've been slowly building out more as we can. This time, we had a little bit of an opportunity to do a little more work on that. So we actually got 10 additional files. They're listed there that now have validation rules as well. And we're constantly trying to add more. And that's another area too. If you have suggestions for rules that we are not currently running that would be useful, please let us know that as well, because we can add rules to this with every release. So more staging validation rules, and I encourage everybody to use it. And then the submission file, I sort of mentioned it in the last slide. We just like, especially, this is really going to impact the larger files. You're probably not going to see much of a difference just because of the speed differences. You're not going to see much of a difference in the smaller files, but large files like membership should be better, should be substantially better when you're trying to create those. But I talked about that in the previous slide as well. So this is the generate documentation slide that I mentioned. The link is there. You can go to visit this page. There's all the release notes are out there. So if you want to see the information that we're covering here in a little more detail sometimes, or maybe it links to, more detailed documentation that I'm going into in this presentation. There's also information in there about installing Generate, upgrading Generate, how to use it. We're building out additional features, and there'll be documentation in there for that. We're developing tools as quickly as we can, things that will hopefully make things more useful for you. There's documentation out there for all of that as well. There's an entire page on the tools that we've built and, how you can use them, how you can leverage those depending on what it is you're working on. So I would definitely suggest going out and checking that out. There is a new staging validation, the thing I was just talking about, because we made some changes to it. And then we also added all these additional rules. There's some new, more detailed documentation out there, and that's the sort of the slide in the front, or the page in the front. It's a sort of a screenshot of that, but you can go out and see the staging validation process. But I would highly recommend go out and take a look at the documentation, see what's out there, what you can leverage, and if you see gaps, let us know, and we'll fill those in as quickly as we can. Okay, so the preview for 12, like I said, the first thing, and it's actually the second bullet, is we will incorporate all of the CEDS data warehouse changes for version 12. So Generate will be on the data warehouse version 12. And then besides that, of course, we will have whatever file specification updates, changes, enhancements. If we have identified any bugs in Generate, we will have all of that. We'll work on all of that for the next release. What we're hoping to get in the next release is, we've talked about this a couple times and we've made a lot of progress, but we haven't gotten to a point where we can fully test this and actually release it. We've got a lot of the foundational pieces in place, but a single screen migration. So if you've used Generate, you're familiar with the process. It's when you go to the migration page, there are 3 buttons. So you perform each migration, and then when that one is complete, you come back to that page, run the next one. When that one's complete, you come back to the page, run the next one. Hoping for is the single screen migration, so you won't have that bouncing around. You'll be able to perform the entire process from one screen. And then that will also allow us to add some additional functionality into the migrations. So hopefully some troubleshooting, additional information that might be useful depending on the migrations you're running, things like that. So we're going to be working on that. We are always working on enhancing the tools that we've developed and then building new ones if we see a need, because each of the ETL implementers that do what I do, as we work with states, we all come back and say, oh, in our discussion, we were talking about this. And that leads to a lot of like, hey, if we had a tool, or if we had if we had queries, or if we had views already built that did that. So we'll work on any of those sorts of things that we can figure out, or enhance the ones that we've already developed and hopefully make those a little better for you. We try to add staging validation rules for more files or more for the files we already have. So we'll definitely do that. And then that last one is what I sort of alluded to earlier. The WIGMO is that that library of functions that we're replacing. So we'll be working on removing that entirely and using the new tool set. So that's our preview for 12. And I think Liz is going to take over at this point.
Thanks, Johnny. Okay, so for the 11.4 release, we have it as May 1st, but it actually, like I said a minute ago, Emily sent out the email earlier today. If you did not receive that, you can just throw your email address in the chat and I can forward it all to you. Moving forward, our next release will be that big 12.0 release that Johnny just mentioned, coming out in September. And then we have our 12.1 release planned for the next month, October. And as you can see on the corresponding side, on the right-hand side, the associated files that will be handling. Additionally, just something that I wanted to mention is something that we are moving forward with and working on currently is, as some of you know, there are about 10 or 11 file specifications within the EDFacts list that do not have, are not ready to be piloted at this point through Generate. And so what we're currently doing is we're working on building out all of the code for those so that whenever you all want to be utilizing them and are ready to start moving forward with some of those files, we'll have the code ready so that they're ready to pilot. I can share that list with you, or I think Travis or Dan is going to throw a link in there, and it will actually show you the ones that say to be developed. So thanks, Dan. So those files that are listed in that is what we're focusing on over the next few months so that, like I said, they'll be in that place where they're ready to pilot with you all. Again, if you have any questions or concerns about that, you can reach out to me directly. And then the last thing I wanted to mention is also for some of you who are not necessarily assigned a specific TA lead or a developer or whatnot, we have an Generate Help Desk email address. If you pop into your environment and you see something specific that you're having an issue with, or you're trying to migrate data and you're having any sort of issue, or even questions or concerns, you can reach out to that email address, the generatehelp@aemcorp.com. Yeah, perfect. Thanks, Travis. You can reach out to that email, and that will go directly to our team, and we will work on getting someone assigned to you to help troubleshoot any issues or, like I said, any questions or concerns that you have. Right, exactly. So you can see everything there is listed as pilot opportunities. So those, all of the code is written. They're ready for you all to be built out with any of the states that are wanting to move forward with those files. Travis, can you filter on the ones that say to be developed? Or did we change? Yeah, so those are the files that we're focusing on right now over the next few months. And so we will get those. So essentially in the next few months, this list everything will be pilot opportunity at that point. So that's what we're focusing on. Just wanted to call it out so you all know. Again, if you have any questions or want to be a part of any of these pilots, please reach out to me so that I can get you on the list.
This is the point where if you had any questions at all, but there was one that came up in chat, I just didn't want to interrupt while Liz was going through those slides. The question was, if you're on 11.3, can you work on 129, which is the file that's due, I believe, in June or July? I always get the dates mixed up. I apologize. You think I would know these by now? But yes, there were no changes to 129. So if you have the 11.3 version of Generate, you can begin your work on 129 and upgrade when you're ready. It shouldn't interfere with your work, but you can work on it in 11.3. So Dave, yes, it is. And I will send it to you. Once we package the release and we officially release, because then we know at that point, hopefully, we don't have any other work we have to do for that particular release. We create the official backup. So yes, I can get one to you.
Again, I know we move slides, but if you have any questions or comments or whatever, you can always unmute yourself or throw it in the chat. So this is the evaluation, like we mentioned in the agenda slide. Again, it's a really quick evaluation. We honestly do use a lot of the information to tweak or edit any of these sessions. So it's really helpful when you all provide feedback. So if you could just take a few minutes to do so. Like I said, it's something that's always really helpful for our team, and we appreciate it.
And really quickly, because and I'll still be on so I can answer questions or anything that you may have as well. But I did want to, and I apologize because I should have done this in the previous office hours and I didn't. But I wanted to call out like Kentucky for this release specifically because they helped us with the soft launch. So basically the way we do it is we do all of our internal testing. We release to both our test and our staging environment. So we test all of that. And then we typically reach out to a state and see if they can help. And then we just like soft launch in the state to see if there are any issues because there's, obviously just something outside of our environment so we can test it. Kentucky helped us with this particular release in the past. And I apologize if I miss anybody, but I do want to say in the past, like Utah has helped us, Washington, Kansas, West Virginia has helped us a couple of times. So we appreciate all of you when you take that time to help us with the soft launch, because it really does help us make it better for everybody when we finally release it. So we appreciate the help.
Johnny, it looks like there's a question.
I saw that. I'm looking.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Johnny,
So
hi, John. This is Ali. If I can ask this question instead of like a chat right here. So
Absolutely.
I'm just trying to run this 129 file, and then for the most recent year, I'm getting 2022. And we already ran the directory file, which is supposed to have the 2024 file. And I'm not able to get anything. You know, I cannot up this number. I cannot change it. So, and again, I can ask this in the email. Maybe this is not the right way to ask this question right now, which is absolutely fine if that's what you want me to do.
no, absolutely. This is the perfect place to ask those kinds of questions. I mean, if it turns out to be a longer thing, we can always go offline. But I think for this one, so that is controlled by the metadata that's loaded with each of the releases. So what we would need to do for you is just make sure that the metadata applied correctly, because you can't change those years. It will auto load the most recent year for the file that you've selected that exists in the metadata. So we can take a quick look offline if you want to send. I can connect with you, or if you want to send something to that email address, and we can connect that way. But yeah, we just need to verify that your metadata updated correctly. And if it didn't, it's a quick fix. We can apply the metadata in a matter of a couple of minutes.
Okay, sounds good. After this like a session, I'll email it, and then we can go from there. Thanks so much,
That is
Johnny.
perfect. Thank you. Any other questions while you're taking the evaluation survey? Hopefully you're taking the evaluation survey.
And just FYI, I think Dan put the survey. Yeah, he put the survey evaluation form in the chat if you all want to just spend a few minutes doing so. Thank you.
And I will be staying on until the last person leaves. So if you have a question, or if you think of one last minute, I can try to help answer.
Thank you all for joining. We appreciate you collaborating with us on this. And like Johnny said, if you have any questions or concerns, we'll be here for the next few minutes.
Thank
Johnny,
you, everybody.
Johnny, it's me again, Ali. I'm new
Yeah.
with the ND team up here, so it's been like 2 months I started, and then I never used this application before. I'm new, so would you suggest me going all the its documentation to learn how these processes just work? Is that the right way to,
I would like to say that our documentation is that complete, but we've got some gaps in it. I think so, and I apologize because it's my hearing. Did you say North Dakota?
No, this is NDE, Department of Education.
Nevada. Oh, okay. Sorry. So yeah, then we can do a quick demo of Generate. We can schedule something like that. That's probably going to be faster, and that also gives you the opportunity to interact, ask questions at places where maybe something, depending on who's doing it, something is unclear or you want a little more information. I think a quick demo would be good. And we can, if you send that email and sort of ask that question as well, that way we can set aside the appropriate amount of time to help do the metadata, resolve the metadata issue for you, but then also maybe do a quick demo. That would probably be faster.
Sounds good. Thanks so much, Johnny.
Yeah, we actually like doing those, so. Yeah, Travis, I think so. And Ollie and Jittima, if you are on there and you have a question, or if you stepped away and missed the end of it, you can reach out. And Ollie, I know you're already planning to, so.
Yes, I will email it. I will just have that email and then get back to you. Yep.
That is perfect. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you all. Have a good day.